Hello, today's video will contain some comments from the textbook about Chapter 7 on Shinto. And this is a very interesting religion of Japan, so I hope this helps with some of the reading and some of the main points that we want to focus on. So our first slide here with some content talks about some of the basics or essentials there of Shinto belief. And before I get to that, I wanted to mention a few other things like I have in the previous videos, but here the author is making a trip to Japan and making his way upstairs to a shrine, and then he throws a coin into a box, claps his hand 3 times, and then you pull a cord to ring a bell. And ringing the bell doesn't alert another person, but it's supposed to get the attention of the spirit of the shrine called a kami. And that, interesting, and we'll see that throughout the video today in the chapter when you're reading. But Shinto itself has no known person or group as its founder. So that's some of our other religions definitely have founders, but Shinto does not. So its origins are really a mystery, but it goes back to the early people of Japan and some of their stories on how the world came into being, their origin, creation, or emergence story. So what's really critical in Shinto is the worship of spirits who are believed to inhabit the natural world. So that sounds a whole lot like animism that we've seen before. So this idea has arisen out of a human awareness of the power of nature, and again, the need to be in harmony with it. So that sounds familiar with some of our recent chapters that we've been reading too. So shamanism, that is very common in the religions we've seen, but here it is again, and how important nature is and how important spirits are, and then just having good relationships all around. So the spirits worshipped include departed family members and distant ancestors and great leaders of the past. The Meiji period, we'll talk about that, but that helped to modernize Japan, but it was later one of their emperors who realized, after the 19th century that Japan needed to make some changes culturally so they wouldn't be so far behind. So a lot of the things that we can see in Shinto, they were in Buddhism, and then they made their way over to Japan. So the Japanese name, for example, for Buddhism is Butsudo, and that is literally the way of the Buddha. All right. Now, Kami no Michi is the Japanese way to say the way of the gods. All right. So there is quite a number of deities that have come about from the creation myth of Shinto, and so what I'm about to mention next kind of relates to that. But in the beginning, they believed that there was just a lot of chaos and going on. And then suddenly, or over a period of time rather, that this chaos became inhabited by some spirits or deities called kami. Kami is a word that means sacred. So there was one that was female, that was Izanami. And then there was a male, and that was Izanagi. And the both of them mean almost the same thing. One is the female who invites, and the other is the male who invites. But these two got together, and they were the cosmic parents who created the first islands of Japan. So in Japanese tradition, there is a written record of this. It's called the Kojiki, and the Kojiki records how they came together. This female who invites and male who invites, and they created the landmass known as Japan. Now, this came about because they had a spear. The spear had a jewel on it, and when they stirred the spear in the ocean, there was brine from the ocean that got on the spear, and it dripped down from the end of the spear, and that's how we have the landmass known as Japan. Now, later on, Izanami and Izanagi, they had children. They had baby kami, if you want to think of it that way. And basically, a lot of these were nature deities. So a fire god, that was one of their children. And they also have female deities that are rather important. So Amaterasu is one that is really in essence, the spirit of the sun, but that takes a major position compared to the spirit of the moon, Tsukuyomi. And usually in most religions, it's vice versa. You have the male god having the more preeminent status and the female god taking the lesser status. But this, for example, these kami are a little bit different. Now, this is important because for a long time, the emperor of Japan, whoever it was, would trace their ancestry back to the kami of the sun, the spirit of the sun. That was Amaterasu. And so they literally would be perceived by people of the country as the emperor, that is, as divine. And that was held on to for a long time. We'll get into some more about that later. Now, all these kami, these spirits, these deities, they basically are family. And so that's an interesting relationship, too, that we can see. All right, so now we'll also see in a lot of these stories that involve the kami. Now, I didn't mention any today, but if you check them out, what you'll find is purity, being pure, is a major concern of Shinto. So you can lose your purity, but you can gain it back. And so usually it's by washing, some type of washing ritual. So water is needed, and if you don't have water, then sand is an alternative there. But in some of the kami that I mentioned, that's exactly what happened to them, that they had to regain their purity, and that's what they did. Now, one other unique fact about Shinto that differs from the other religions we've seen is that other religions think of this world as the testing ground, and the next world as the one that's going to be great and paradise and heavenly and just all kinds of good things. But Shinto turns that on its head, more or less. And it sees this world as the paradise and not the world after as the one that you're really destined and looking forward to being a part of. But this world here and now is the paradise to really take advantage of and enjoy. Now, some other things that I want to mention there. Now, with Shinto, we can see that Buddhism played a part of its development. Buddhism actually forced Shinto to define itself somewhere about the 6th century. But there was already, Buddhist worship going on of their deities in Japan under Shinto names. But again, there was just some blending of the two religions that took place. And then Japan with Shinto, had to develop its own system of writing. That took quite a bit of time. And then there was a lot of architecture, poetry, and ceramics that were put into play, but influenced by Buddhism and some of the other religions there that occurred in this part of the world. Now, Buddhism and Shinto, they also kind of reached an agreement with one another, but they would associate things of the other religion in theirs so that, people, if they came to their temple, then they would find familiar facets of both religions there. So, Buddhist temples, they had a Shinto shrine somewhere on their grounds, and the same thing for Shinto is they often in their temples had a Buddhist place of worship or Buddhist rites for the kami. So that really went along until the Meiji Restoration there in the 19th century, but then they really kind of had to split doing that. Now, the Japanese have a strong national identity, and they believe that they are a unique people, a strong people, and that's certainly nothing wrong with that. But they were so apprehensive and concerned about Western influence, they basically kind of shut themselves off from the outside world. And this lasted up until the mid-1800s. And what happened as a result is they really fell behind economically. And that's when one of their emperors, Emperor Meiji, decided that, hey, this has got to change or we're just going to be so far behind, and we don't want that to happen either. So then, that's how Shinto and Buddhism kind of disentangled. And then Shinto itself got to be tied to really that spirit of nationalism, tied to the overall development of the nation. And then in the late 19th century, what happened is Shinto basically became a national religion, and it got national funding and support from the government. And that was at least a good thing. But all over the country there, shrines were treated as independent, and they got financial help and support from the state. Now, after World War II, that starts to change. Shinto is no longer kind of the national glue that holds them together. Japan comes more secular. As a result of their defeat in World War II, the emperor is forced to relinquish or renounce his divine status, and then state Shinto, the state religion, was basically abolished. Now, there is kind of an interesting little article, almost getting to our first slide here, but right before that, they talk about in World War II, since I mentioned that, about the kamikaze pilots. And so now that word probably makes a little more sense. But there's the kami, and of course that refers to spirit. But now these pilots, when they were carrying on their mission in World War II and seemed to us to be suicide missions, the Shinto priest would bless the planes and the kamikaze pilots. And so, again, they look at life and its transience, and look at death somehow a little bit differently than maybe what we are taught in our culture. Now, we're not really talking about Confucianism this chapter, but we did it in another one. But it stresses loyalty to the government. And Bushido is the warrior way, but that is the warrior code of loyalty, duty, and honor. So with samurai. But this maybe helped understand a little bit more about what happened during those times. Now, the essentials of Shinto belief, we've got a couple slides here, so we just want to talk a little bit. But as we start out, and this first statement is in our textbook, but the really heart of Shinto as a religion is the sensitivity to the mysterious powers of nature. And so, we've talked about the kamis already, these spirits, but their presence can be felt in nature. So if you're in a grove of trees or a waterfall, the practitioner of Shinto would say, hey, you can feel their presence. Now, this is meant to be in a positive way, but the kami can also cause dread or, the negative emotions. So these are the energies that animate nature. So the practitioners of Shinto would treat kami as persons, and then that's why they're given names so that people can approach and feel close to them. And there's just so many major kami. We've already mentioned some of them, but even the lesser kami are going to be surrounded in nature by like fire, grain, the ocean, the mountains, great trees, rivers, and more. Even animals, for example, are mentioned in Shinto that also kind of are going to have this kami too. Now, there is a ancient book, or at least a chronicling of Japan as a nation, and it's called the Kojige, and it was written a little bit after 700 in the Common Era. And then there's the Kojiki, is the Chronicle of Ancient Events, and the Nihongi is the Chronicle of Japan, and that was written about a decade later. But they are core written works that have ancient myths that tell us more about Japan. Now, also essential to Shinto belief is it has no clearly defined code of ethics. That's completely opposite of the Western notion, where if you do something wrong, you may feel internally guilty. That is not in Shinto. Shinto does not have a moralistic God who gives commands or judges people. There's no such thing as original sin or a sinful tendency. Shinto instead sees people as basically good. They are fundamentally good, and so is earthly life. Shinto puts more of its focus on fertility, new life, and actual sexual reproduction. It's viewed positively. There's no guilt about those type of interactions. So in some shrines, you'll actually see imagery that is of a sexual nature. Shinto focuses on the life force. It worships the life force. The religion of Shinto tells you how to keep your bodies, your houses, and your clothes clean and bright. And then it also emphasizes human character and relations, that they must be healthy, both mentally and physically. Those who practice Shinto want to be sincere, and that sincerity is called Makoto. And so they're going to downplay the individual, no egotism, but committed to fulfilling all your obligations, repaying all your debts, and then if you make a mistake, you apologize. So I've mentioned quite a bit about the kami, but they're just everywhere in Shinto. The Japanese see this aspect of their religion everywhere, and they want to show respect and to maintain harmony with it too. And same thing for the ancestors too. All right. I've already mentioned with the introductory story about some of the visits there, but if they go to the shrine of a particular kami there, that there can be a priest who helps to perform ceremonies or blessings in addition to the story mentioned at the beginning. And then other social events such as weddings. Now, they usually take place away from the shrine that's here on the chart. All right, but now people visit the shrines and they pray for lots of things. They want health, well-being, success in school, success at work, and also for those that they care about. So those are common requests when people go to a shrine. And then there's a process by which when you go to the Shinto shrine that you must follow. So first you got to pass under the entrance, and that's called a torii. And then there's a basin of water there where worshipers would wash their hands and mouth. The Haiden is where people worship the kami, so you're getting close to the shrine, and then there's a procedure to follow for that. So people would bow down, they donate a coin, they ring a bell to get the kami's attention. That was our introductory kind of story. They pray again, they bow, and then that's it, they leave. Now if you want a blessing, that's where the priest comes in. And he would say a prayer and then maybe waves a branch or wand of paper that has streamers over them, over the worshiper. So that is supposed to purify them and the surrounding area. Now there are ima. Ima is the small wooden plaques that are tied on sacred trees or sheets of paper. And then that's what you put your request in, and then they're put on the fence. Now a little bit later in our chapter we'll have some key terms, but one of them is the Matsuri, and that's the festival day that each shrine pays attention to. A hand-carried letter is used, and it's called the amakashi, but it's used to honor those who are celebrating the kami. Now, usually when people go to a shrine, so I already mentioned they might be seeking blessings for certain things, but it could be also important events in their lives. So when a baby is born, what people will do is visit a shrine to somehow get protection. And this is known as 753. So girls are brought in at ages 3 and 7, and then boys are brought in at age 5. So the 753. So mentioned earlier about the weddings, so they can happen at hotels usually or someplace away from the shrine. But the priest can go not only there, but bless construction sites, your home, bless your car, bless any type of thing that you want to do in order to have this good fortune, so to speak. And the Shinto priests themselves, now they're mostly male, or they are male, and then they have female attendants. The female attendants are called miko, but the priests usually wear long robes, and they can be of many different colors. They wear a cap that's black, and it also contains horsehair. So why do they wear the horsehair attached to the cap? It's because in Japan, the horse is considered a sacred animal. All right, and some of the other essentials here on our third slide is in celebration of the new year, but that is a very important time for Shinto practices, the new year. So again, we mentioned, hey, that your home must be thoroughly cleaned. You do that to make it attractive to the spirits. So that makes a little bit of sense if you're unfamiliar. You know, you clean your house for guests. Well, if the spirits are coming in, you need to have it clean there too. Again, another one of these vocabulary terms on one of the later slides in this series is the katamatsu, and it is a special arrangement of 3 cut pieces of green bamboo, a small branch of pine, and a string of plum. So all of these are symbols that have significance again, of celebrating the new year and having the kami come in to see all these positive, clean things. But really, now altogether, all these symbols represent human virtue. So now they also have some foods, and they have significance too during this New Year's celebration. Rice that's pounded into a soft dough, but it signifies wealth and fertility. There's a soup that is used that is thought to promote health. And then the dress that people have on this special New Year's festival and celebration is usually kimonos, and then offerings are made in hopes of obtaining success for the new year. Now, people usually do, for example, can have a shrine in their home, and they are still observed today. And then there are some other things, for example, that happen to show Shinto's respect for nature. So for ancestors, you pour water or tea over their gravestone, and then you leave offering of foods and flowers. Another ritual that they have is standing under a waterfall, and that is actually seen as an act of purification. Another Shinto practice that's important is climbing of a sacred mountain. And so a lot of times people in Japan who practice Shinto want to at least climb, say, Mount Fuji, and they want to do that at least one time in their lifetime. Now, the last thing here on the slide is talking about, again, daily worship in the home, and that is the small Shinto shrine is called the Kamidana. So it can have a mirror, it can have some of these food offerings that we mentioned, or liquid offerings, and then sometimes people have outdoor shrines in addition to the indoor shrine. So a lot of times these outdoor shrines are going to be gardens. And when it comes to Shinto as a whole, usually the emperor, or in the past, the emperor had been considered the high priest of Shinto. So usually one of the important shrines, there's a yearly visit where the emperor would have taken a journey to the shrine and made a prayer there to actually benefit the entire country. And then the emperors were buried with full Shinto rites. Now, on this next slide, we have mentioned some of the kami that are very important. We mentioned actually, I think the first four, but mentioned the spirit of the moon, and that was one of the lesser kami compared to the sun goddess, and then the parents of Japan are the first two. And then the one that's at the bottom of the PowerPoint we did not mention, but there again the kami is, this one is the spirit of the wind. So there's just lots of them. Some of these are major, as the slide is titled, and then you also have the minor ones. Okay, so some more of the key terms. Now, we have covered the kami, but the jinja is the traditional architecture that you see in the Shinto shrines. So at first, they were used as storehouses for grain, and then they began to be raised off the ground to protect the grain from the water and the bugs that tried to get in there. But they were perfect natural homes for the god, and the gods were considered the protector of the foods, and these jinja, they carried the grain, so that was the perfect match. So sometimes the repairs need to be made on them yearly. So that's kind of an interesting mention of how it served two purposes. Okay, and then some of the last term there is the gogaku, and that is a distinctive Shinto music. Again, stately ceremonial, I think, is correct as well. And there's in Blackboard, I think I actually have an example of that if you're interested to see how it sounds like. And it is kind of described as a fluty type reedy sound. So it was used in the official court proceedings of the Chinese during different dynasties there. And again, if you want to, you can look at that online in our Blackboard course. Okay, so Moving on just a little bit, the Matsuri. We've talked a little bit about some of those festival days out there. The Katamatsu is part of that festival there. We mentioned about the arrangement of the pine and bamboo that has the symbolic meaning for those important New Year festival days. The Shimenawa is also part of this festivities. Again, everything has a meaning. And the Kamidana was the home altar that had mentioned not too long ago. Now, as we've seen, it seems to be the case with just about every religion that we cover. There are some people who disagree over some things, and so that's how an offshoot or a branch starts. And our PowerPoint slide here lists several of those. Now, some of these offshoots are even labeled by some as entirely new religions, but they do seem to have in common, that they all started from Shinto. Now, Shinto itself is not really a strongly institutionalized religion. So that just means it's not really organized enough to make converts, and so it really hasn't spread beyond the land of Japan. Now, how you come up with these offshoots is you start to use rituals or the symbols and values kind of in new ways, and that is how you come up with new forms of belief and practice that really maybe are more contemporary in nature. So as time passes, people just decide, well, they like to do this, this, and this, and that's how these offshoots really start. Again, sometimes they're called new religions, and some of them consider themselves to be, a completely new religion. Now, Japan, the country, has a long history of shamanism, and that seems to be common in a lot of the religions we've seen, and so that makes you think of the indigenous religions that we covered early on in one of the other videos. But the shaman or medicine man has a very important function because he is an intermediary, or basically in the middle between the gods, or the kami, and the human beings. Now, one of these offshoots is Tenriko, and that is also the heavenly reason teaching. That's what that word means, but it's one of these new religions or offshoots. Now, it has a founder, and it was a woman, and she lived or died rather in the 19th century. She lived from the 18th to the 19th century, had a good long lifespan, nearly 90 years. But she had a troubled marriage, and then she went to a shaman who performed rites to improve her marriage. And this is how she discovered her religious abilities by accident. So after this, for example, she went into a trance that lasted several days. And what she revealed was that a kami, a spirit, had spoke through her. And this is what the kami said, is that I am the true and the original God. And so when she came out of her trance, she said that many other spirits had spoken through her. And so she said that the greatest of them was the parent spirit of all human beings. And that was known as the Lord of Heavenly Reason, was the name that it gave to this woman. So from the rest of her days from that, she tried to teach others how to live properly so that they might have health and long life. So Tenriko advocates that to be physically healthy, you must have mental health. And that certainly fits the description of kind of what happened with her life and going through her marriage difficulties. All right, so another one is Omoto, and again, it has a different founder. But this is, again, another woman who had experienced terrible poverty and misfortune. She had 8 children, but 3 of them died, and then 2 of them had mental illnesses. Her husband, to complicate it further, her husband died when she was 30, and then to support her remaining children, she had to sell rags. Now, she later, for example, had a vision. Her vision was of a new perfect world, and that, clearly goes back to what she was missing in life. And so she later worked with some other people, and she adopted them as her own children. But later she established this type of Shinto religion that her ultimate goal was to transform society. So that sounds a lot like Confucius that we have also seen previously. So this is part of that Japanese belief that, hey, you want to better the world here and now rather than in the afterlife when things are all good and fine. Now, in Omoto, one other thing we could say is that all art is religious. They've tried to create a new universal language in Omoto, and even it itself has offshoots or other religions. So one of those, it's not on the slides, but it is the Church of World Messianity. So it's got a different name, a Japanese name, and I'm afraid I can't pronounce that, but wanted to at least mention that as well. Now, what was interesting about this offshoot of Omoto is its founder was believed to be able to heal others simply by using his touch and then the source of light that came from his body. And so in his efforts to heal as many people as possible, he tried to share it, and he would write down the character, the Japanese writing for light, which was Hikara, would write it on a piece of paper and then give these away to people who followed him who were sick and were hoping to be healed. So in this offshoot of Omoto, their goal is to work for a time when the earth will be free of war, poverty, and disease. So that's some lofty and noble goals that are going to take some hard work. The next offshoot of Shinto here on our last slide today is Siko Nole, and that is the House of Growth. Now, another one is P.L. Kyoden, and that is the Perfect Liberty Community. And then the final one is the Hanmichi, which is the True Road. Now, all of these groups, I just mentioned them and kind of lumped them together because they have similar goals. All three of these, really, they're looking at, again, health, harmony, beauty, happiness, and making this world the best place it can be. You know, it's focused making the earth a paradise. And these last three offshoots, they seem to be more peace-oriented, being practical rather than, hey, you know, focusing on how we should be in the next world. The last comments that I would like to make for this video is, what about Shinto in the modern world? What are some challenges or problems that may come about? And so Shinto itself is a good example and should remind us of what we saw in the chapter on indigenous religion. So it's an early nature religion, and those are still vital in the world today. There's a place for them. Many of the values of these indigenous or natural religions, nature-based religions, they have some values that are certainly very important today. So part of those would be being non-judgmental in terms of moral views, inclusiveness and trying to include everybody. They're kind of low-key. They have an emphasis on living right. They have an emphasis on healing and being happy while you're living in the world. These religions have a positive view of the body. They have some pleasing and interesting rituals, and they really focus on the here and now and how we can maximize well-being and living for people now. So now, Shinto is not really a missionary religion, but you can go many places in the world, and people who have visited Japan have traveled elsewhere, and you can still find followers there. You know, even in the United States, in places like Hawaii, California, and Washington, there's a few there, and then other nations such as Brazil and Peru. And finally there's just one other story I want to mention. It won't take but just a second or two, but it mentions a woman who traveled to Japan. She was from England. Her name was Isabella Bird. It's just an interesting story, but it was in the 19th century. And she left and traveled and had all kinds of experiences there in Japan. Well, she documented these and wrote them down in letter form and sent them to her sister. Her sister preserved them, and now these have been collected in a book. And her letters describe in great detail all the interesting sights that she saw and all the interesting things that she did. And then, you know, some of the shrines and places of worship and other things in Japanese culture. But they were very colorful and positive descriptions of her life experiences. So that does sound interesting and kind of in tune with what our book presents generally. Okay, so I hope this video has been helpful, and thank you for your time in viewing or watching, and I hope it helps cut down on some of your reading, and make some of the terms more familiar. Don't forget the resources in Blackboard in terms of the vocabulary. With Quizlet you can practice, or the notes and outlines that are there, again, to maybe shorten down some of that time for reading. So I hope you have a good day. Please contact me if I can help you, and I'll see you next time.